So just a little bit of self-introduction. My name is Xianhao. I'm a year 3 computer engineering student. I'm going to year 4. And I've been working with React Native since last year for my internship. So more or less, I have about 1 year plus of React Native experience. And of course, I'm still learning because the thing about React Native is that the community is so big. There's always new packages coming in, and there's always new updates. So what you learn today, might not be, well, they might still be relevant in, like, say, next year, but you will be sure to, like, see new things that are coming up from the React Native community that might be better than what we have just learned today. Okay, so I'll go through the scope for today's workshop, meetup session, really. Can everyone see the screen that says the slides? Okay, great. So I'll spend the first 30 minutes covering the key concepts in part 1, which is what you guys have done. Hopefully, the first part of the slide. Then I will review the answers for exercise 1. Thereafter, we will take about a 15-minute break before I move on to part 2. So part 2 consists of 5 concepts. So I'll only cover these 2 concepts in today's session, which is conditional rendering and file-based connectivity. So for the other 3 concepts, the slides will be uploaded, and you guys can just read through them yourself. They are actually pretty relevant to your projects if it is a big-scale mobile app project. Okay, great. Let me just make more people starting to come in. Okay, great. Yes. Okay, so let's move on to the key concepts in part 1. So the first part of the part 1 basically tells you how you set up the environment. So just to recap, we are using Expose CLI to bootstrap our project. And in my slides, I've also mentioned that if you are using a Windows operating system, you probably want to run your device you will probably want to run your project on your physical device through the Expo app, because that will be a lot faster. Because there's no way for you to get the iOS simulator, and the Android simulator is just super slow. And for this additional tools portion, I didn't cover this in the part 1 of the slides. So basically, you guys can look up these 2 tools that are pretty helpful in managing your code base. So the first one is called ESLint. So what this does is that it helps you to check for possible errors in the code base and flag out those errors in your IDE. And the second one is called Prettier. So what this does is that it actually standardizes the coding style for your code base. So you can just pretty much just code however the way you want it to be, and just run this Prettier, and it will do the code formatting for you. Okay. Next. Okay, and then we look at the concept of component. So the concept of component is really important in React Native because when we build an app, everything is made of components. So really, the idea behind the concepts of component is to break down every part of the app such that you only implement one part at one time, and then bring them all together so that they work as they work together as the entire app. So each component is in charge of handling the logic and the appearance of that particular component. So for instance, I think you guys have seen this image in the part 1 of the slides. So this is an app that tells people or helps people adopt dots. So we can see that the gray border is the entire app component, and then we break down the app component to the header component, and also the list component, which is a flat list, and also in each list, in each item, there's a row component. So for instance, in the row component, the logic in this case might be tapping on a row will bring user to a sign-up form to adopt that party. And the appearance in this case is that you can see that the photo of the dots are in 1-to-1 aspect ratio is flush to the left, and the name is bolded. So really, when you build each of these components, you are looking at how each component looks like and how it interacts with the data flow. And we also look at the two types of components that you can implement in React Native. So the first part is function component, and the second one is class component. So the difference is that the function component is implemented as a function, and the class component is implemented as a function, as a class, I'm sorry. Okay, right. So any questions at this point of time? I'll just stop for a while. Okay, great. So I'll move on. So the next part is the arrow function, and this is one of the key aspects that we will cover as far as ES6 is concerned. So for those of you who don't know ES6, which stands for ECMAScript 6, which is standard for JavaScript. And the reason why arrow function is important because the benefits that it confers in a React project has it's quite a lot. So for those of you who have went through the part 1 of the slide, you will know that if you use an arrow function, you don't have to do the binding of this function into the constructor of the class, right? And also, arrow function is just really easy to read, and it is a great way to declare a nameless function. So in your traditional JavaScript function, you will have to give the function a name. But in the case of a arrow function, so for instance, I can omit out this part which says const function name equals to, and just do the later half of this body, and that will work as well. And we also look at JSX, which is basically the fundamental working part of React and React Native itself. So JSX is actually, it looks really like HTML, but it really isn't. So what it does is that it actually declares the user interface, and it links up the logic to the user interface. And we also talk about how essentially every component is a JSX object, because for every component, we will have to return a JSX object. So in a React Native / React project, what you normally see is that for each component, there will be a combination of JavaScript and JSX. So the JavaScript portion really handles the logic, and the JSX portion really handles the linking up of the logic to the into the UI, and also to describe the UI itself. So the main difference between functions. Okay, so we have a question from Ambrose. So the question is, are there any main difference between functions and classes besides the syntax? So in previous React versions, only in class components you are able to do states. So I'll talk a little bit more about states later. So in previous React Native / React versions, function components are really what we call stateless components. So you cannot actually have a state in function component. So I'll talk a little bit more about what states are for later. So, but of course, with the new React version, you are actually able to do state management in function components itself. But for the simplicity of this tutorial, we'll just assume that you can't actually do state management with function components. Okay. Okay, great. Any questions so far? Okay, I'll just move on. Okay, great. So now we're talking about the main app control. So for every React / React Native project, props and states are the most important part as far as data flow is concerned. So what are props and what are states? The comparison between props and states is that, okay, so firstly, props and states, they are both a way to pass / store data. But the difference between props and states is that props are immutable and states are mutable. So what this means is that you can't actually change props per se, but you can actually change states. So a different way of looking at this is that when we look at props, we are talking about passing of data, right? So for instance, from one screen to the other. So we will do that through the props. When we look at states, we are really looking about storing of data for that particular screen. Okay, so for instance, let's say we have a login screen, right? And once a user login, so ideally you want to store the session ID somewhere in the app. So that session ID will be stored in a state, right? And let's say we want to display the user ID somewhere in the app, and the app is not, and the place where we display this user ID is not at the place where we store the user ID. So what we will do is what we will do is we will actually pass the user ID from the place where we store the user ID to the component that actually prints the user ID. Okay. So we also talk about how to access props and state using the this keyword. So to access the props/states, you will do a this.props or this.states. And that's for the class component. Right? For the function component, we will access the props through the function argument. And also, I've mentioned earlier just now, assume that there's no state for function components for now. Okay, and one key thing to note is that do not modify your state directly. So I think like one of the challenges when developers move to React, the first thing is they will tend to do a assignment of state, which is wrong. So you have to do, so when you modify a state, you will have to use the this.set state. Do not just access the state directly and change the values in the state. Okay. And also this is and also if you have gone through the exercises, you will notice that it is not possible for you to have 3 top-level components. I mean multiple top-level components. So what are top-level components is that when you return when we return a JSX of the object, the topmost like the component that encompasses all the other components, that should only be 1, that shouldn't be 3. And this makes sense because, as you mentioned earlier, each component really returns a single JSX object. So for instance, in this case, I want to render 3 texts. So there's text 1, text 2, text 3. So I cannot actually just do a return of these 3 components as it is. So I have to nest them in a view. So that this view is 1 top-level component, and I have 3 sub-components in it. Okay, so this is one of the common pitfalls that new developers face when they do React or ReactNative as well. So they assume that you know, oh, I can just like put in any component as they want, but you have to remember that you can only return 1 top-level component and nest the other inside the top-level component. Okay. Okay. So any question up to this point of time? Okay, great. So I'll just move on for now. Okay. So next is styling. So when we talk about styling, really the way to go about doing styling is using style sheets or create. So if you guys have read about styling in React/ReactNative, you will know that it is possible to do inline styling. But you know, for code quality's sake, always use a style sheet or create function. And some of you might ask, like, so how do I know like what are the properties for each component? So there are 3 groups of styles that can be mapped into each of the components. So there are text style, view style, and image style. And I really want to use and I really want to show you guys how you can use the ReactNative documentation to figure out what the properties for the stylings are. So for instance, let me take a look at view style. So Let's bring this up. Okay, so when you when we see the documentation, you would So firstly, notice that there is image style, text style, and view style, and the layout props and shadow props apply to any of these three styles as well. So when you scroll down, you'll see so the props are listed here. So you can do a border right color, and the type is color, right? So really, if you have no idea like how like what other properties that you can include to style your component, look at the documentation, because more often than not the information is there. And also when you want to know like which style fit into which component, you can look at this core component page. And then, for instance, if I were to look at flat list, go down to the styles prop section. Okay, so for flat list, it's a bit different because they have separated the style into the different components in a flat list. So let me go for something simple. For instance, okay, so here you can see the style. So when you look at each component in the documentation, you will realize that they will link you to the different props for the styles that are available. So in this case, layout props is applicable to this image component. And they'll also give you a list of styles that are applicable to this component. But for some components, you'll realize that they'll actually give you a link to one of the types of the component. So for instance, let's try scroll view. Right. So in this case, under view, the type will be view style. So you can click into view style, and you know what the props are. Okay. So this is a way to find out what the different style properties we can apply to each of the components. Okay, so I have a question from Hui Qing. So is view compatible for all users to group everything into a single top-level component? Yes. So the idea of view is, so the way that I'll describe view is that it is this imaginary box, right? That encompasses of everything that you want to put into this box. So really the idea of using view is to group certain components together to apply the same set of styling, which I will go through later under Flexbox. So yes, view is compatible for all users to group everything into a single component. Okay, so next is Flexbox. Okay, so this is probably one of the more complicated concept, because you really have to like picture how the Flexbox works. So the reason why we use Flexbox is because we want the app to look the same across all devices. Okay. So the four most used properties for Flexbox are flex direction, justify content, and align items. So flex actually defines how much the component fills along the space. How much the component fills the space on the main axis, and flex direction defines the main axis. So the values are row, column, row reverse, column reverse, and the default is column. Don't worry about this yet. I will do a demo later on what each of these values mean. Justify content actually says how the components are aligned on the main axis. So for instance, if your flex direction is row, so the main axis is along the x-axis. And justify content, let's say if you do, will apply to the x-axis of the Flexbox. And align items defines how the components are aligned on the cross-axis. So for instance, if your flex direction is row, then align items will apply to the y-axis. Right. Okay. So very quickly, I'll do a very fast demo on this Flexbox concept. Okay. So let me run this. So of course, I'm using the iOS simulator because I'm on a Mac. But if you are not on a Mac, you'll probably have to do this on a physical device so that it's not slow. Right. Okay. So here you see that I have defined a view, the top level component that wraps up, that nests these three components: red box, green box, and blue box. And the styling, of course, and the top layer component has defines the way that the sub components are being built. So for instance, in this case, I'm saying that we are using the y-axis as the main axis, and justify content, which is along the y-axis. I have space between. So space between means that I will spread out the components evenly, with even spaces in between. And the align item, which is along the x-axis in this case, is in the center. So what you can see here is that these three boxes are in the center. So for instance, let's change this to row, and we'll see what happens. Right. So as you can see, in this case, I've changed the axis, where the main axis is now the x-axis, and also the align item will be on the y-axis, which is in the center. So the most commonly used justify content properties are space between, and the other one I want to share with you guys is space evenly. So what space evenly does is that it creates this space around each component that's even for all components. And of course, you can do a flex start or flex end. So flex start flushes the component all the way to the start of the y-axis. I mean the x-axis, because we're using row in this case for the flex start. And of course, flex end flushes it to the end, right? And this applies to your to the case when flex direction is column as well. Okay. And let me see. Okay. And the other thing I want to show you is how flex works. Okay, so in this case, you notice that each of my boxes have a height and width of BP, right? So let's try doing this. Let's set this to flex 1. And this to flex 2. So recall that our main axis in this case is row, which is along the along the x-axis. Okay, so you notice that once I put in the flex, right, it doesn't really take into account of the width anymore. And the reason for this is because our red has a flex value of 1, our green has a flex value of 2, and our blue has a flex value of 3. And what this means is that it will take out the entire length of this screen based on the ratio of 1 to 2 to 3, which is why in this case you will realize that the width is no longer applicable in this case. So you can really just remove this, and it will give you the same result because flex has been applied, right? And so you may ask, like, so why do you take this whole this whole width of the screen as the baseline? And the reason for that is because our parent component has a flex value of 1. So what this means is that our parent component will take up the entire screen basically. Okay. So if I were to set this parent component to a week of, say, 300 in this case, right? So you'll realize that as the ratio of 1:2:3 will only apply to a week of 300 in this case. Okay. So the idea behind this Flexbox is that regardless of the device that you open this app on, it will always show you this 1:3, 1:2:3 as a aspect ratio. What happens when you remove Flex1 in the container? So in the first container, okay, so in this case, let's see. So in this case, the components are shifted to the top, and you will realize that it's called the align item is not really applied in this case, but the truth of the matter is it is still being applied because what it really takes is the height of the child component in this case instead of the entire screen, because we didn't actually define flex equals to 1. So when you do not actually do that, what happens is that the parent container will actually take the dimensions of the child container in this case. Okay. Yeah. So what does flex1 do? So I'll repeat again. So flex1 actually says that for this parent component, it takes up the entire screen of this of the device. And in the child component, when I do a flex1, flex2, and flex3, what it means is that within the limit of the parent container, how should I distribute these three components as far as their width is concerned? And the reason why it is width in this case is because our our flex direction is row. So if I were to change it to column, you'll realize that, oops, can't do this because so I have to actually change. I have to set the width. Right. So in this case, you'll realize that I've actually the ratio will be distributed vertically, right? Because I've changed the flex direction to column. Okay. Okay. So there's a question from Jay. Why can we just use JS object instead of using stylesheet.create? So you can actually use JS object when you do inline styling, but as I said, because inline styling is not really recommended for code quality purpose. So when we do a so when we were to isolate out the styling, it will be better to do it with stylesheet.create. Okay. Any questions up to this point of time? Okay. So if you have any questions, you can always ask me during the break, and I will try to explain it again better, because I know that this is a very complicated concept because you really have to like visualize the x and y axis to understand what each of these values mean. Okay, so next thing we talk about is the core component. So the core components consist of view, text, text input, and more. But we only cover this 6 components. I mean, eight components in the tutorial. So you can always go to the ReactNative documentation to learn more of the other core components that you can apply. Okay, so we have virtualized the switch. This is interesting because it actually gives you the binary user interface, right? And the idea behind these core components is that they are the building blocks for more complicated components as you go along building your own component. Okay, so this slide is actually to tell you some of the neat tricks that we do to go around some of the issues that we have in React Native. Yeah, correct. So if it's not inline, you cannot actually just declare a JavaScript object for the styling. Okay, so the first thing, I think this was mentioned in the Slack channel. So to handle devices with notches, because React Native is device, like it wouldn't know if that particular device has a notch, right? So so to go around that, the first thing you have to do is to nest your components into this safe area view. And the reason why we want to separate this from the view is because there are instances where you want the entire component to be spread across the screen. So, for instance, like a background of your app, like you wouldn't want the app to stop at the notch. Like you want it to cover the entire app, right? So you will still use view in that case. But in this case, but for instance, if you want a particular component to be rendered outside of the notch, then you can use safe area view. And the thing about this safe area view is that it only works for an iOS device. So on top of this, you will have to set the margin top property in the safe area view to status bar.current height. So status bar.current height actually returns the value of the height of the status bar in Android devices. So the reason why we want to do this both is because safe area view only works for iOS devices, and status bar.current height only works for Android devices. Okay, so I will do a quick demo on this again. So for instance, let me go back to my initial what do you call it, setup, right? And this was space. Okay, so you will notice here that in this case, my red block is actually being rendered into the notch of the device as well, right? So what I can do here is firstly let me import say excuse me from React Native, and I'll change this to safe area. So safe area view is exactly the same as view, but except the fact that this is a view box that's actually rendered inside the outside of the notch area, right? So every props, every style that you have applied to view can also be applied to safe area view as well. Okay, and also just to make sure that my my app is compatible with Android devices as well, I will have to do a margin top. And let me import status bar from React Native. So in this case, I'll do current height. Okay, so let me just refresh the app very quickly. So you will see that that these three boxes are actually rendered within the safe area view. And for iOS devices, if you're running on iPhone 10X, remember, it actually takes into account of the bottom swiping out drawer as well. Okay. Okay, and the next thing that I want to show you is how you can make your mobile app mobile responsive to make it display differently across different devices. So when you use Flexbox, recall that it actually maintains the same aspect ratios across all devices. So if I were to run this same app on, for instance, iPad, you will notice that the box is actually really small. Something like that. I'm going to wait a while because I'm running two simulators at the same time. Okay, so let me run this. Okay, so this is not on. So this is not to scale, obviously, because there's no way that an iPhone 11 is of the same size as an iPad Pro. So I'll put it on scale, so you can roughly see what I mean by the difference when it comes to. Okay, let's see. Okay, so you can see that it's literally almost the same size as the iPhone. So ideally on an iPad, I want my components to be bigger because the real estate here is a lot bigger. So as to make full use of the screen size, right? So what I can do here is I can actually use this neat trick called dimensions.getWindow.width. So what this actually returns is that the width of the device that you're currently using, and also you can do the same for length. You get the length of the device that you're currently using. And using these values, you can actually set how the style of a component to be like depending on the size of the device. So that's a very quick example. So in this case, let me just do a dimension import from ReactNative first. So in this case, I want my box to be bigger for the iPad, right? So what I can do here is, firstly, maybe define a constant. So you can of course use length, but I'll use width in this case. Okay. So I will do device width bigger than. So for instance, I'll put here 500, right? No, 500 is still the same size. Okay, I'll put here 750. So if it's more than 750, it means that the device is possibly a tablet, and I'll set my height to 100. Else, it will be 50. Okay, so I'm sure you're familiar with this ternary operator. So what this means is that if the device width is more than 750, I'll set my height to be 100. Else, it will be 50. So I'll copy this to the width as well. So you can see a bigger difference. So you can see on the iPhone, it is still the same, but on the tablet, it will be bigger, right? So this is one of the ways that you can make your app mobile responsive so that it will be better displayed across all devices. Okay? And the last thing that most people face is that how do you actually avoid the virtual keyboard covering the text input field? So sometimes your text input field is too low to the bottom of the screen, and when you tap on it, the keyboard will actually cover part of the text box. So nesting the component in this keyboard avoiding view will actually help to solve this problem. So I'll actually do a demo for this for the exercise 1 of part 1 later on. Okay, so there's a question. So can we also set the width percentage directly? Yes, you can do that. You can do a percentage, but if you think about it, then there's no difference from doing a flex in this case, because when you do a percentage, you're talking about a percentage of the screen, right? I'm not talking about the exact definition of the dimension that you want. So for instance, if 50% on the iPhone will be 50% on the iPad. And the reason why this might not be feasible is because sometimes when you think about some components, you might not want to have the same ratio for that component on a bigger device. So for instance, if you think about a text field, right? So on a iPhone, maybe 80, if you do an 80% width of the text view on the iPhone, that looks perfectly fine, right? But if you do 80% on the iPad, that might look too big in terms of user experience wise. Like, I mean, if you were to put in your email address, you'll probably only take up like 1/3 of the text view. So the reason why we want to use device width in this case is because we want to set the exact height or width of a component for a particular device. Okay, but I hope that answers the question as to why the difference between 50% and using a dimensions.get. Okay, great. Okay, so the next thing that we covered is the lifecycle method. So for those of you who have read through the required reading, there are a lot more lifecycle methods than these three, but these are the three main lifecycle methods that you'll be dealing with most frequently. So the first is component dip mount, and this is executed after the component is mounted. So that is when the component appears, right? And component dip update is executed when there's an update in either the props or the state. And of course, component will unmount is executed when the component disappears from the screen. Okay. And we also covered asynchronous function in part 1, but I won't go through that here because for today's session we don't really need it except for the database connectivity part. Okay, so for those of you who have not gone through the async function, I would strongly advise going through that because it is important when you want to fetch data in the background. Okay, then this is the optional part about separation of concerns. So separation of concerns is the idea of separating different code base, different source code based on what they are used for. So for React/ReactNative, we have this presentational container component pattern. So how this works is that you will build each component to either a presentational component or a container component. And the reason why we want to do this is because we want to isolate the components that deal with the logic from the components that deal with the loops. So for presentational components, they tend to be reusable components. So for instance, if your app has a custom button that's being used across the entire app, you want to put that in the presentational component because that's going to be reusable. And also, presentational component tends to be function components because they have no states. And of course, container component tend to be class component because we normally involve states, right? And also, in terms of business logic, we will normally put it in container component. So business logic, so things like fetching data from the background, you put it in container component instead of presentational component. Okay. So and also, if you have read the small notes at the bottom of part 1, you notice that you're not actually required to follow this guideline. I mean this pattern because this is really just a guideline. So in fact, there are people who disagree with this pattern. But for me, for my work, we have been using this pattern, and it's pretty. I would say it works really well across most of the apps that we have developed. Okay. Okay. So right now, I'll talk a little bit about exercise 1 and how to go about solving it. So there are some implementations that we have not covered yet, which I think some of you might have difficulty in implementing, and I will go through that in a little bit as well. But I will just go through how to implement this UI from a interface point of view, which means to say that let's not deal with the logic yet. Let's just go into how to implement this UI itself. Okay. So let me open. Okay, so the first thing that you notice, I mean, the first thing that you actually do when you get a wireframe like this is that you actually want to break down the different components that are involved in this wireframe. Okay, so I actually very quickly break down the different components and put them in this like text box. So we have the first part, which is this image. We have three text boxes. So very quickly you will know that this will be text input component. This will be an image component, and this will be a button with a background. So so if you've gone through the exercises, you will realize that you can't actually use the button component in this case because the button component doesn't actually have a background color per se, right? So a better way of doing it will be to use the particle opacity in this case, right? Um, and also we have this text component at the bottom that's in green. Okay, so and also when we look at this all these components, we can know immediately that they belong to a single top level component, right? So like I said, imagine that there's this imaginary box and this will be the view. Okay. So there are a total of what? 7 components here, right? The top level view component, the image component, the three text input component, the touch opacity component, and the sign up success component. Okay. Okay. So when you set up your app, you will notice that there's this app.js group component. Um, so when the app launches, you will actually get everything from this app.js component. So for this reason, we will not actually want to do an actual development in this file per se because this is like really the top level component that that really encompasses everything. So normally what I will do is adhering to the container component pattern, I will create a component folder and a container folder. So the component folder actually contains all the presentational components, and the container folder actually contains all the um, container components, right? And then I'll create this thing called the sign up container field, or the sign up container component. And because it is a container, I will declare it with a class. Okay. So let's talk about so ignore the state and the business logic first. Let's talk about the UI itself. So as I mentioned first, we actually enclose the child component in this imaginary box called the view. Okay. And inside the view, we have the image, the text input, actually 3 text input, and of course the blue button. So you realize that I've actually created this blue button as a presentational component because I might have to use it again in my app in the future, right? So for my blue button, I actually declare it with a touchable opacity component, set the background to be blue, and of course set the font size and the paddings to be based on the specification, right? Okay, so ignore all this for the time being. I'll go through that very quickly. And of course, our last text field, right, that says sign up successful. Okay, so now that I've gotten all these components in place, I'll have to start to think of how do I go about styling each of these components, right? So the first thing that you want to do is look at this parent component, look at this top level component, and decide whether what's the main axis in this case. So as you can see that these components are actually arranged in a vertical order. So which means that in this case, my flex direction, my main axis will be the y-axis, right? And because of this, I'll actually set my main container with a styling of flex direction of column. Okay. Now next, let's think of how Now let's think of how the items in the parent container on the top level container is being aligned. So our main axis is the y-axis, and on the x-axis is in the center. So we know that you have to use the align item property and set it to center to centralize this entire component into the center of the x-axis, right? Hence, in this case, I've actually did a justify align item center. Okay. Now, next, you have to decide how are each of these components being spaced out. So because I've actually stated the spacing for each of these components, I do not actually have to do a, what do you call it? Like I do not actually have to do a space between or space evenly because the spacing between each components are different. So which means to say that I can actually put all these components and declare their justified content as center, so that they will, this entire component will be in the center of this entire screen, right? So in this case, I have set my justified content to center, and of course I have set my flex to 1 because ideally I want this box to take up the entire screen. Okay, even though in this dotted line it might seem that it's only the container that I'm concerned with, but in reality this view actually extends to the entire screen, which is why when I do a justified content center, these child components will be in the center. Okay, so now that I've gotten that done, I'll have to think of like how I should go about styling the image and the text input, right? So for all this, you will have to refer to the ReactNative documentation to see what are the stylings applicable. Okay. So these are the stylings applicable to the different components. Okay. And very quickly, I want to talk about this image component because you realize that I've actually stored this image in my code base under assets .logo, right? So the image is here. So some of you might ask, like, why not just fetch this image from the URL itself, since the URL is provided in the wireframe. And the reason for this is because when you do for some reason, when you load the image through a URL, you will have to define the width and height of the image for it to appear properly. Because if not, you will not get the correct aspect ratio of this image. So which is why I will choose to import my image file locally into my code base and do it required. Okay. So next, I'll move on to the blue button container. So this is my reusable container, and I'm using touch opacity because I want to do like styling on the background to give it a background color. Okay, and the thing that you might be unfamiliar with is probably crop stock children. So what this actually gives you is whatever children that's being wrapped around this property. So for instance, when we look at sign up container, in this case, you will see that I wrap around my blue button with a text sign up. So when I actually apply this component, you will see that my prop stock children will actually return sign up because I've nested sign up into this blue button. Right? Okay. So is there any question up to this point of time before I take a break and we go into part 2 of today's workshop? Okay, then in that case, let's take a 5-minute break. We will be back at 11 to move on to part 2 of this workshop. Okay. And of course, feel free to ask me any questions during this time. I'll see you around. Okay, sure. Yeah. Right, so I think I forgot to mention this. So in this case, sign up successful will actually just show up in the app. It won't actually show up after you click the sign up button. And I'll actually talk about how you actually implement that in part 2 of today's workshop later on. Yes, so these files will be uploaded later for you guys to read through. And the code bases are available as well for you guys to download, so you can try out some of the activities. Because I know that the pace is a little bit fast because I only have 2 hours, and also it's not easy to pick up everything in 2 hours, right? So if you guys are free, you guys can actually read up more about the Flexbox, because I think that my explanation might be a little bit fuzzy, and I think that there are online resources that certainly do a better job than me. And also because it is a really important concept for React Native, because most of the app, in fact, the default display type for React Native app is Flex. For those of you who have done CSS, you understand what I'm saying. So, which is why it is really important for you to understand the concepts of Flex for a React Native project. Okay, any tips on how to start building the whole app in general? So I would say go through the part 1 of the slides, because that actually has a really detailed explanation on the different components, and also how you can do styling. In terms of like structuring your code base, I would actually recommend doing the presentational container component pattern. So just like what I did with the exercise 1 code base, create a container directory, and then create a component directory, and move all the presentational component into the component directory, and move all the container component into the container directory. And in terms of like planning, I would say always do a wireframe first, because then you will have a better picture of how to group each component together, right? Okay, so it's 11 now. I'll move on very quickly to the next part of this workshop. Oh, by the way, part 1 of the slide is uploaded on the Slack channel, I believe. So yeah, you should probably start with that to have a better to have a proper kind of like start of React Native. Okay, so during the break, we have a question on like how do we actually implement the logic of this sign up successful, right? So the logic is in this case is that we will only display a successful sign up after clicking on a sign up button and when there are valid inputs in these three fields. Okay. So in this case, what we will need to do is what we call a conditional rendering, which is what I'll be covering now. So this is really in part 2 of the slides, which I believe Dr. Zhao Jing will release after today's session. So the idea behind conditional rendering is that we only want to render a certain component based on a certain condition, and these conditions are actually Boolean conditions, which means it's either true or false, right? So consider this use case where I have an app that differentiates between a normal user and an admin user. So I want to render the admin tool only when the user is an admin, and I'll render the user tool only when the user is a user. So there are 3 ways to implement a conditional rendering. So the first is the ternary operator. Second is the logical operator, and third is the if-else statement. Okay, so we'll look at each of these 3 ways, each of these ways to implement the conditional rendering based on this use case. Okay, so using the ternary operator, I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So it has a form that looks like this. Okay, so considering our use case previously, we will only render the admin to the admin component when the user is an admin, and we'll only render the user to when the so if the user is not an admin, we will assume that the user is a user, and we will in this case render the user to. So this user is admin is a Boolean condition that we pass in from the prop. Right. So this is one way of implementing the ternary operator for conditional rendering. The other way that you can do is, of course, like this, where we take out the top level component completely and just return the component itself. So in this case, you can see that return if user is an admin, return the admin tool. Otherwise, returns the user tool. Okay. So there's one new thing about this code base here that you probably have not seen it in part 1, which is in this first section that says const user is admin equals to this.props. So this is really what we call a object destructuring in JavaScript. So what this does is that you can have direct access to the properties inside the object. So for instance, we know that in this case, props actually have an object called user is admin. So instead of doing this.props.user is admin, we can just destructure the user is admin from the props and use the user is admin in this case. So the benefit of this is of course that we have a cleaner code base because there will be lesser this.prop or this.states in your component, right? And of course there's a link for you to read more about object destructuring. Okay. Okay, next is the logical AND operator. So this actually works exactly like how you use it in a if-else statement, right? So in this case, again we have a user is admin boolean that has been passed into the prop of this component, and now to render the user is admin, we will do the boolean condition, do a logical AND operator, and followed by the component to be rendered. So a different way to read this statement is only if user is admin, then you render the admin tool. And of course, for the user tool, here we make the assumption that if the user is not an admin, we will render the user tool. Okay? So this is the second way of doing a conditional rendering. Okay. Now, the third way is probably the way that many of you will, are familiar with because it's using um, our classical if-else statement. So what you do here is you do a if statement and check the Boolean condition, and then you return the component itself, right? Okay, so the difference between the if-else statement and the previous two ways of doing a conditional rendering is that for if-else statement, you have to actually you you have to actually return the whole component, and you cannot do an if-else statement inside um, the JSX, as you can see in this case. So in this case, I can actually do, so I'm already inside the JSX object, and I can actually do a logical AND operator or a ternary operator in the JSX itself. But in the if-else statement, I cannot do that in the JSX itself. I will have to do a full return of the component. Okay? Okay, what is this dot props referring to? Example, if state is declared when this state refers to state, but where is props? Okay, so props is actually the properties of the container. So it is a intrinsic object that is within each component. So what this means is that, let me see if I can find an example in this slide. Oops. Okay, so you see in this case, right? So for child component one, user ID equals to this dot state dot ID. So in this case, I'm saying that child component one has a prop called user ID, right? And in the child component one, okay, so it's actually here. I made a mistake in the slide. So let this be child component one. Okay. So what I'm saying is that in child component one, there's this property called user ID. So to access the user ID, I can do a props.user ID because previously in the parent component, I actually declared that there's a prop here, right? So this is what this props refers to. So prop is really like think of it as like in each container there is a container that stores some information that is being retrieved from the parent container, and it is an intrinsic object in the sense that you don't define it on the container itself, but you actually kind of like declare it in the parent container when you the parent component when you call the container. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, great. So back to conditional rendering. Okay. So in this case, so some of you were asking, okay, so how do I get the sign up successful to only show up when I actually sign up for the app? Okay, let me just do a quick run of this app first. Okay. I don't actually want to use an iPad because it's really slow. Oops. What's that? let me just run this app very quickly. Okay, so you can see that this is my implementation for based on the wireframe just now. As you can see, the sign up successful is showing out, even though it shouldn't be because we didn't actually do a sign up in this case, right? So, okay. So what I will do now is I will actually, firstly, I will declare a Boolean condition in the state. And the reason why I want to do that is because this is where, the state is where you actually store the data, right? Oh, so by default, I'll give it a false value, okay? Because by default, we don't actually there's no sign up occurring yet. Okay, so in this case, you can see that I've actually set the logic that checks for the text field. So what this logic is saying is that if the length of the text in text field name, email, and password are all not equal to 0, then I'll execute this.set state, which gives me the empty, which kind of like clear the text field for me based on the requirement that we have set up earlier. And also I want to do a set state of here to be false for my Boolean variable. Oh, I mean to be true, right? I'm sorry, to be true. Okay. Oh, yeah, okay, right. And also, let's use the object destructuring that we have learned just now in this case, because as you can see, I'm calling this.state like a million times in this case, right? So let's do a destructuring. Name, email, password equals to this.state. So with this done, I can actually directly access the name, like the different properties in the state itself. Cool. All right. Okay. And the same for here. I can declare. So in real time, the code base actually looks a lot cleaner in this case. Oops. Because we have a lot less this.something. Okay. Okay. So great. So we have all this set up. Now we have to do a conditional rendering for this text. So this text will only appears when the sign up successful is set to true, right? So in this case, I'm going to do a logical AND operator. Okay. So before that, always enclose it in the open braces, because what this tells the DSX is that whatever that's inside here will be a JavaScript and not DSX, which is why you have to put these braces. So this sign up success. Okay, right. Then I will do a bracket just in case. So what this means is that if sign up is successful, then I'll return the text. Okay. So let's check if this works now. Oh, that's spelled wrong. Oh, I forgot to restructure it here. Very good. Okay. Right. Okay, great. Okay, so let's try this. So let's do John.Doe. Oh, this is John Doe. The name, the email, and the password. So I'm using plain text of password here just for this purpose. Okay, and you'll realize that the keyboard is kind of like covering the text field in this case, and it will actually cover the text field if you use a smaller device. So I'll talk about how we solve that problem later on, but first let's just see if the conditional rendering actually works. Okay, great. So I've actually cleared my name. I've actually cleared my name, email, and password, and of course the sign up successfully showed up. Okay, and of course we can do this with a ternary operator, right? So make this change. And in this case, I'll return now, which means that I'm not returning anything per se. Right? Oh, okay. I miss a bracelet. I miss a I mean, there you go. Okay. So what this means is that only when the sign successful is set to true, then I'll return this component. Otherwise, I won't return anything. And you'll realize that this works as well. Okay. Okay. So, and you might be asking, so how do we use if else in this case? And the answer is that's not possible because we are actually doing the conditional rendering inside the JSX portion of the code itself. So in this case, we can only use ternary operator or the logical AND operator. Okay. So any questions up to this point of time? Okay. To MPL. Okay, so what I did here is I actually set the name. Okay, so the thing that you have to, I think this might be missing in the tutorial. So you actually, in each of the text field, you have to set the value to be the state, the state that contains the value. So what this value pop does is that it actually contains, it actually shows what is currently being displayed on the text field itself. Yeah, so try actually setting the value equals to name, email, and password, and run your code again. So that should work. Yeah, I think this is missing in the tutorial. Yeah, great. Actually point this out to me because um, this is actually pretty important. So I have no idea why it was missing from the tutorial. Okay. Okay. Great. Okay, so the next thing that we have to do is fix the keyboard issue. Okay, so of course I'm using an iPhone 11 simulator in this case, so this is not a big problem. But the problem will arise when I'm using a smaller device. So the way to go about doing this is we can use this. So recall in my previous slide that we have this component called keyboard avoiding view, right? And what you have to do is you have to nest the entire component into this keyboard avoiding view. And keyboard avoiding view shares the same properties as view. So, so again, whatever that you have applied in view for your style, it applies in keyboard avoiding view as well. Okay. So in this case, let me just save it. And it was, oops. Okay, I guess this is not. Okay. Forgot to. So there's a property in keyboard avoiding view that you have to set. But I kind of forgot now. Yeah, so even I'm referring to the documentations because you know, things like this happen. Okay, so behavior. So you have to set this behavior property to be. So I'm using iOS in this case, so the recommended property for iOS is padding. Okay. So the behavior pop actually tells the app how it should react when the keyboard appears. So for iOS, it's recommended to put padding, which means that it actually adds padding to the area where the keyboard is showing. Okay. So let's run this code again, and it should work. Yeah, there you go. So you can see that. The entire component actually shift up for the keyboard to fix its space, lah, right? Okay. So this is keyboard avoiding view. Any questions up to this point in time before I move on to database? Okay, I guess no. Okay, I think I've overran a bit, so we might have to cut into, like, we might go a little bit after 12. So for those of you who can't stay, do feel free to leave anytime because, like I said, this will be uploaded. But those of you who can stay, you can work through this exercise with me on the database connectivity. Okay, yeah. Okay, so in this part of the tutorial, I'll actually teach you how to connect to a database backend with Firebase. And the reason why I use Firebase in this case because it is basically a all-in-one package where hosting and querying is taken care of. So you don't actually have to learn like SQL languages, or you don't actually have to learn like how to do hosting to have your own backend server in this case. And also, it has a very user-friendly graphic user interface console. So you don't have to deal with the terminal or the command prompt. For those of you who have like nightmares with that. And also, just to share a little bit about database. So whenever we talk about database operations, we'll always come up with these 4 basic operations, which is create, read, update, and delete, right? Or what they call CRUD in short. Okay? So create involves adding new entries to the database. Read involves retrieving new entries, retrieving existing entries from the database. Update, of course, you update the existing entries in the database, and delete will involve deleting the existing entries in the database. Okay. Okay, so for this part of the tutorial, I'll actually use the code base in exercise 1 to go through this. To work through this. So for those of you who do not actually have the exercise 1 done, you can actually get the code base here. Let me just copy into the chat so that if you want to follow it, you can go ahead and follow it. If not, you can always use your own code base if you're working out. Okay. Okay. So the first thing you have to do is create a Firebase database. So for this part of the app, you can go through the creation process with me. So go to console.firebase.google.com and log in with your Google account if you have created previously. Okay. And then what you're going to do is you're going to select create a project. Okay. So I've actually done all this step already, so I won't be going. So I'll be doing physically myself. So if you need more time before I go to the next slide, do let me know. Otherwise, I'll just move on. And I'm going to put in your project name and then click continue. So in this case, I've I put my project name as ReactNative-demo. For this tutorial, we will disable the Google Analytics because the setup process will be shorter if you don't do it. But for our own project, you might want to use the tools that Google has for to do any form of analytics, right? Okay, so once you are in your project console, look out for the section that says add an app to get started, which is this portion here. So in my case, I'm using a iOS device, so I'll create I'll hit on the iOS button. But if you're doing on Android, you will have to click on Android. If you're doing for both, you will have to click on both. Okay? So for the iOS app, run through the setup process. For the iOS bundle ID or package name, if you use Android, it can be anything. So it doesn't really matter at this point of time. And leave the app nickname and the App Store ID or Play Store ID optional, or just don't fill that in. Okay, you can skip this config file download because we don't actually need it for now. Okay, so once you're done creating the app, go to database, which is on the left side of the panel under the develop. And we are going to create what is called a Cloud Firestore. Okay? So under Cloud Firestore, select create database. Right. Select start in test mode because this is, excuse me, because we're not doing an actual deployment yet, so we'll use test mode for now. So there isn't. So the difference is that it's faster and we have less security concerns in test mode as opposed to the production mode. Right? Keep the region to NAM5 US Central and hit done. Okay. Okay. So up to this point, does anyone need more time to set up the database? If not, I'll just move on. Okay. Okay, so next we're going to click on Start Collection. So a collection is really a table per se. So ideally what you want to do is data that are of the same type, they will belong to the same collection. Okay, so in this case, I'll create a collection called users because I want to link up my app to the database to create a user and store the user detail in the database. Okay, and at this point in time, you can create a dummy user just for fun. So in this case, I have created a dummy user. In the document ID, if you do not see this jumbled up text, try to select a option that says random something. I can't really remember, yeah. But the idea is it's like it shouldn't be blank here. It should be jumbled up text. Okay. And of course, to simplify this tutorial, we will save the password as plain text. By your actual implementation, please hash your. Okay, thanks. Equal, yeah, it's auto ID. Okay. Yeah, select auto ID. Okay, and to simplify, okay, and I was saying, I will save the password as string or plain text in this case, but in your actual implementation, please hash your password. If you do not want to be reported for security breach. Okay. Okay, so now I'll actually do the setup of the code base. So go back to the app. I will stop this. Actually, let me just minimize this. Okay, so you have to run this command expo install Firebase in your project directory. So what we do here is that we're actually installing a Firebase package so that we can talk to the Firebase database, right? And of course, we can use. Oh, and expo install might be new to you. It is the same as yarn or npm, except the fact that expo install actually install packages that are relevant to your current expo version. So it will actually not install. So it might not actually install the newest package because it might not be compatible with your current expo version. But it will install the package version that works for your expo version. Okay, next, create this configuration file for our Firebase database, okay? And paste this code in. So for those of you who are following the tutorial, I'll paste this in the chat so that it will be easier time for you. Right, so I have Prettier installed, which is why if you can see, like I can actually get the code base to be formatted pretty quickly. Okay. Okay, so now the next step in this would be to, I think, okay, so now the next stage will be to figure out what all these fields are, right? So to do this, go back to your Firebase console, and we'll have to create a web app. So in the main page, when you see this web like icon, click on it. And of course, you can put in a web name of your choice. It doesn't matter um, what's the name of this app. It will work regardless. Okay. Okay, and this is where the information that we will need for our configuration file lies in. So when you scroll down to this part that says Firebase config, copy everything here um, into the uh, Firebase db.js file that we have set up earlier. So in my case, I've actually set up okay, so I've actually completed the first. Okay. Okay. Yep. So copy the information there into your this configuration file. Yep. Does anyone need more time to work on this? Okay, I'll move on. Yeah, so our final Firebase.js file should look something like that. Okay, so now we have kind of like set up our database configuration for our app. So the next thing I will have to do is create the CRUD operation, the for CRUD operation. So the first thing that I have here with me is creating users. So what you're going to do is firstly import Firebase DB from the configuration file that you have set up earlier. Okay. So for instance, in my signup.container, I will do a right. So this is actually using the default export Firebase here in this case. Okay. Okay, next. Then I have to create a method that actually allows me to store the data onto the Firebase database, right? So I have this code here that I've pre-written it. I'll just copy it into the text for you guys to put it into your code base to see if it works. I mean, it will work. That's like, so you guys don't have to, type it up yourself. So in this case, I will put it here. Handle to user. Actually, no, I'll be copy. So let me just talk a little bit about what this code is doing. Okay, so firstly, it is telling me that I'm accessing Firestore, which is the database type that we have actually created on Firebase. And then it is looking at the collection called users. So recall previously that we have actually created this collection, which is basically a container that contains all the data that has a similar type, right? So in this case, it is user. And a dot add operation. So what this means is that I'm adding a new entry um, that have the property name that's being set with the value of this.state.name, email with the value of this.state.email, and password with this.state.pass. Okay, so this is the add. So this part of the code basically is trying to tell me that I'm going into the Firebase database. I'm looking at the collection called user, and I'm adding a new entry that has these three keys and these three values. Okay. Now, this part of the code with the dot then, so if you have gone through the async function, so this is basically an async function. So what this does is that, so this part of the dot then, what it actually tells you is that, let's say I have executed this code successfully, right? That I've completed adding a Firebase, that after I've added my user info into the Firebase database, what happens next? Okay, and in this case, I've set, I've actually changed the set state to the different value. So if you remember, when we set up the when we click on the sign up button, this is what happens. So right now I'm putting that into this part so that we know that if a user has been created, the boolean for sign up success will be set to true, and we will set the name, email, and password fields to be empty. Okay, and of course we have a patch in this case. So let's say if there's any error, so if there's any error, then you probably won't even hit this part, right? You will straight away go into this part of the code that says console. And we will log the error as a console error. So for instance, let's say if your internet connectivity is bad, we need actually make a successful handshake to the database, then we will go into this part of the code that proves the error. Okay. And of course, I'll have to update blue button. So I no longer have to do a set state here because that's handled by my database, my then condition in the database. So I will do this dot create user interface. Right? Okay. So now we can try it and see if it works. So because we do not actually have a way to like print out the users first, you will have to refer to your database itself to see if the user has actually been successfully added in. Right? So what I will do now is I'll actually open up my Firebase and put it side by side with the tag itself so that you can see. So here I've created a user collection. I only have any users entries here. Oh wait, actually, yeah. Oh, I think I do. Okay, so let me try adding the user in this thing. I'll click on sign up. Right, so you can see that the entry Mary Jane has been added. Okay. Okay. So this is, and the reason why the sign up successfully didn't show up is how it's because we made a mistake in this state. So this should work. Let's try again. Name, email. Okay, there, there you go. And of course, it has been added into the database, right? Okay, so this is the sign up portion. The create portion. So the next thing that I'll be doing is to update. By the way, any questions of this part of time for the sign up for the create operation? Okay, then next I'll move on to read user, the read operation. So what we are trying to do here is we want to actually get a list of users in this case, right? So I've actually created a separate component. So you guys can copy this code into a. So firstly, create a user list container in your code base. So I want to create a new component because this is a different because this is a this because this component has a different function as opposed to the sign up component. So then just code this coding to the direct convert from this by the formula here. Okay, so yeah, I've set up a quick base. If you need more time with this, I know that it is for some reason the formatting is not kept when I copy it in the Zoom group chat. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is so just to give you a very brief idea of what this the idea behind this component is that we have this loading state and a user state. So this is loading state is to tell me if I'm currently fetching the user list, and if it is, I'll actually return this component called an activity indicator. So this is actually this swirly loading thing that you actually see on the iOS or the Android. Okay? And this is loading state. And this user state actually stores all the user data that we actually fetch so that we can return it into the component. And for this component, I'm using flat list because it will show the users in a list form. Okay, so in this case, we'll actually have to use the component big mount lifecycle method because we want the component to actually fetch the users from the database once you have actually clicked on this component, which is once this component has appeared on the screen. So in your code base again, go back to your user list container and type in component big mount. Okay? And we will have to do a fetching in this component big mount method itself. So I'll do this again. I'll copy the code in. Okay. And again, because I've previous set up, so I can do the reformatting pretty quickly. Okay. And I'll just talk a little bit about what this code is doing here. Okay, so again, we are using Firebase DB, which we imported from the configuration file. We are using Firestore, which is the database that we created on Firebase, and we are looking into the collection of users. And after that, we are doing a get. So get in this case actually returns me a list of all the users, right? And then we'll do a then in this case. So you realize that in my parameter in this nameless function, I can actually give it a name. And the reason why I want to do this is because I want to access the results that are returned after I have done a get here. This is why I gave a name here called query snapshot. And of course, I initialize a constant result to an empty array. And this array will be populated with the users that I've retrieved from the results that I've gotten back from this Firebase, from this get operation. Okay? So you will see here documents.snapshot.net. And the reason why we have to do a docs is because the results of the users are stored inside this docs object. And this is stored in an array, so you have to do a doc map, right? And we're going to push every single user data into this constant here. Okay. And once this is done, I will then do a set state where I actually store the user array list here into the state of users. Okay. So this is a rough idea of how this get operation works. Right? And of course, we have the catch thing at the end that catches if there's any errors that appears. Okay. Okay. So now we have all this. Now we have this set up. We have to think about how do we use the data that we have retrieved to display in flat list. And the good thing about flat list is that it actually takes in a array as a set of data and do the formatting of it into a list for you. Okay. So I have the code ready here. So you guys can copy this into your code as well, the updated flat list. Okay. Okay, and I'm using a style container. So let's just ignore this for now because I haven't set up the style. Okay. 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 So let me just talk a little bit about this flat list for those who didn't actually look into the flat list documentation. So we have three required properties: data, rendered item, and key extractors. So data takes in an array of data that we want to display in the flat list. Render items actually states how each item should be shown in the list. So in this case, you have to access this object called item because otherwise you might not get out data. So this is pretty much fixed. This part of the code. You cannot actually rename this part where it actually gets the item. So one of the common errors is some developers will try to rename this to perhaps their own name, and as a result of that, they couldn't actually retrieve the data that has been fed in. So always remember to do this part where it says deconstruct the item, because only then you'll be able to access the individual item properly. Okay? So I don't actually need this. And then so for this part, what it's saying is that for each of the user, I'm going to display under a view parent object, and inside the parent object, I will have a text that says the user's name and the user's email address. Okay, so and of course I have to do it export default. This key. Okay, so I'm actually going to call this component from the root component because that's where the that's where the app will first run, right? Okay, So I have removed the setup container in my root app.js, and I'm showing the user list container instead. Okay? So let's see if it actually shows my user. There's something wrong with it. It's clear. Excellent. Yeah. Nine 36. Really? Yeah. Okay, that's weird. Let me look at the completed code. Okay. It's wrong. Explain it. No, I'm not doing it. Let me try to debug this in the meantime. Oh, it works now. That's great. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I was missing the return statement. Yeah. Okay. So it works now. Yeah. So I think just now I did something like this. And this won't work because I have a braces here. So I have to do a return. This. Okay. Okay, great. So now you can see that these are rendered according to the name is on top, at the bottom, and of course I can create some styling so as to make the differentiation between each row more defined. Just import style here. Use margin version. Just do this as 20. And so what I'm doing now is I'm trying to make each row of item more defined by adding a margin on top and below the item. Good. That is heading as well. Hmm. Oh, okay. There you go. Yeah, these are the things that really bothers me sometimes when looking into it. Okay, there you go. So you can see that each row is more defined. Okay, so is there any question? So I'm I'll be stopping here for today. This slides will be uploaded for the rest of for you to know how to implement the rest of the operations, which are delete and update.